Okay, so if you had trouble on this homework, make sure you get this set up. Here's some follow-up questions. All right, check out this question. Thumbs up when you have a guess. Have a conversation.
The motion goes this way because the friction's going that way.
Okay, so just a clarifying question. Direction of motion would be to the right in the same direction as the shopping cart. And the opposite direction of motion would be to the left.
Because the item wants to slide this way, so fraction slides that way.
Yeah.
Just pull the road.
If I start pushing this, it doesn't just stay in
I'm like, I'm gonna change my ways.
Okay, what do you say?
B. B.
You know, I'm gonna put a double ticket and say
Banana.
Okay, so here's our shopping cart. Here's our groceries.
That sounds like a very
They exist. All right. So what is the state of motion of the can? At rest. So what does inertia want to do? Stay at rest. Okay. So if I speed up, I'm not necessarily looking at this situation yet. Okay. If I speed up really fast, watch what happens to the can. Okay. Relative to the cart and someone pushing the cart, what does the can look like it did? It looks like it slid backwards. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So which way, as it slides backwards, which way is friction acting? To the right or to the left? It's opposing slipping and sliding. Does that make sense? So it's acting to the right. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you looked at it from your point of view, sitting there, okay, it's at rest. Watch what happens to the can. Okay. The can started here, ended up here. It moved, it experienced acceleration to the right. Not as much as the cart did, but it did move. Why? Because there's friction acting on it, going that way. So bring it into this scenario. We didn't speed up so fast that it started to slip. We just did this. Okay. It wants to do this, but because it was what type of friction? static. It prevented that slipping and sliding, but it was acting to the right or to the left? To the right. Beautiful butterflies. Okay, does that make sense? Two things I want you to walk away from this learning. Number one, a lot of times people will say, oh, something's moving. That must mean it's kinetic energy. That is not the condition. The condition is not moving versus not moving. It is sliding versus not sliding. Okay, the fact that there was no slipping or sliding between here, that makes it static. Okay. The second thing I want you to walk away from is the fact that it is, people always say, oh, friction always acts in the opposite direction of motion. No. It always acts in the opposite direction the object wants to slip or slide. Okay. Friction enabled this to move. It opposed that slip. Good with that? Next question. And what I am referring to is this right there. This. As I kick off. Yeah, studying sound.
What's positive and negative? Where's the positive?
So the same direction of motion would be to the left, opposite direction of motion would be to the right. The way you're walking. It's to the left direction of motion. Thumbs up when you have something. Question? Or thumbs? Okay. Have a conversation.
Yeah.
Correct answer is bountiful buffaloes. Okay. So if I was on ice, and I tried to take a big lunge, what would happen to my foot? If I wanted to like take off this one, I'm like, which way would my foot go? My foot would slip this way. So the fact that it's gripping means is preventing my foot from slipping backwards. So which way is friction acting? That way, in the same direction as motion. Does that make sense? The fact that we have friction enables us to walk. We couldn't walk the way we do now without friction. We'd have to push off stuff to go places. For a little bit. I'm like, oh, I missed my turn. Shoot. I'm gonna have to go.
Imagine a 40-yard dash, but you have to like pull and push yourself.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting.
Okay. So, good with that? Okay. Hey,
I leave my water bottle in here. I think I did.
you can check it. Maybe. I don't know. Is that
Yep, that's the one.
okay? Winner, winner, chicken dinner. All right. So, take a peek at that one.
Ooh. Knee hurts me. It's bad.
I asked my brightest that one time. I was like, why don't you just put it in water?
Yeah, that
They were like, it'll break the brakes.
It won't break the brakes. Okay.
The transmission will become small.
Yes. Okay. So
We'll go, babe.
we talked about this on the worksheet already, but I want to actually deep dive into it because we drive. Okay. Okay. So if your tires ever slip, slide, or skid, that is okay. So here's the road. Here's your tires. Here are the molecules between them. Okay. If you lock up your tires, you are skidding. You're ripping mountaintops off. Does that make sense? Okay. So A, C, and D actually have the same effect in terms of your distance of stopping. These two will drop your transmission. Okay. Don't try that. Okay. I've seen movies where people have done. I'm like, that is the dumbest thing. Okay. Whether you're slipping just or like doesn't is still slipping. Okay. What you want is gripping between the tires and the road. And so yeah. And so what happens is here's your wheel and the molecules as it rolls interlocks with the road and hopefully grips. Okay. We don't want slipping or sliding going on between the tire and the road. Kinetic friction. We want static friction. And so we want the tire to continue to roll. Does that make sense? Okay. And so that is why we have the feature of anti-lock brakes. Okay. It's now pretty standard, I would say, in most cars. This is where when you smash the gas or the brake pedal, you feel the feeling, and that's where the brake pads are grabbing and letting go from the wheel really, really fast.
My car's too old.
Okay, now if you have a car that's old or you've disabled the ABS, you need to tap the brakes, pump the brakes. Okay, to prevent the locking up, and you just want to keep that wheel rolling so that it can have maximum static friction and not kinetic friction. Good with that? So there are several questions on number, what was that, 4? Everybody, any other questions on that? Okay, so good to know. Before we do this last question, I'm going to do some warm up. If you're following along on the notes, I'm going to be jumping around. Okay, give that one a shot.
Why would you push straight
Make it easier on you than doing it at an angle.
through? No. Clearly, they don't know what they are.
Is force of gravity actual force of gravity or just all the forces pointing downwards?
No, the actual force of gravity.
Oh, wait. I'm smart.
Tell your neighbor.
C.
Tell them why you think so.
A, because you're pushing
Sean,
downwards, because
Sean,
the force applied.
Sean,
Sean, what? You're pushing onto a solid surface. Yeah, but it fights back. And so you're pushing gravity on top of your force applied, which means the neutral force is going to be, or normal force is going to be neutral. Because normal force is just gravity in reverse to support the ground. But when you're pushing straight down on it, you're applying more force, which means normal force has to apply more backwards. So the normal force goes up, you push down.
But I thought that force of gravity would be was normal force, or else it would just go straight through.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you're pushing
Yes,
down
but
more
since
force.
you're pushing down, if you didn't have more normal force, like contradicting your downward force, it would go through the side.
But you're
Okay.
The normal, no,
Yes.
Okay.
Pushing.
If it was at rest, this is a good conversation. If it was at rest, or sorry, it is at rest. If there was no applied force, it was sitting there at rest, so you know the sum of the forces in the y direction are equal to 0. And normal force would be equal to the force of gravity. Okay, does that make sense? If it was just sitting there. Now, you come along and you push down on that, the sum applied force. Whether it's more or less than how much the force of gravity is, does not matter. So your setup looks like this. Normal force minus force of gravity minus applied force is equal to 0. Good with that? So your normal force is equal to your force of gravity plus your applied force. That's the math. So which is bigger? Normal force. Because it is the sum of how much it weighs and the applied force. Conceptually, as you push down on it, the surface has to support more, has to counteract more force than how much it weighs, because now you're pushing down to keep the sum of the forces equal to 0, to keep it at rest. Does that make sense? If you were a bug under here, would you know the difference between when the mallet itself is sitting on you versus someone pushing down? Oh yeah.
Because if you're lightly put out of the bug bug, are you a cockroach or are you a spider? But then what about the areas?
I would have been.
It's off.
You're a spider. You,
Okay.
You're a cockroach. You feel affected.
Now, next question.
You're in a home show. You're just walking.
So guess what I'm going to recommend? Because that's how we figured out the last one, right? Setting it up. Thumbs up when you have a guess. Have a conversation.
B.
D.
D
I got
is
D.
so
Why
friction
D?
is not gonna be greater than friction.
Yeah.
So it can't be A.
So
And
B.
then force negative is gonna be greater than force of gravity because you put a one here, then you'll have some force going up and not some going down.
You're pulling on it, right?
Completely just
Right.
horizontal.
So
Since there's a
right?
little bit of pull.
Well, hold up, it's D, right?
It is B, so.
It is D, because you're,
I just explained
because you're
that.
pulling
I explained it,
upwards.
yes.
Which means you're saying we said that was like greater than.
I'm back. Yeah, I was like thinking about it and I was
Go
like,
ahead.
hold on. That's what I just remembered.
Because
Go
you're
ahead.
pulling upwards, which means you're less than the
But-
gravity.
Applied force.
How's the external force not?
Because neutral
It's
has
hard
to be
for
less because
yourself
you're letting. And I got, when I could, yeah, I got these.
Okay, so free body diagram. Call that applied force. And kinetic friction. Good. The fact that we're moving at a constant velocity says the sum of the forces in the x direction are equal to 0. So you have applied force in the x direction. So the x component minus friction is equal to 0. So friction is equal to just the x component. Just this part. So which is bigger, the whole force applied force or friction? Whole applied force. Okay. So that brings us down to B and D, which is the popular two that I heard. Is that everybody all right with that? Okay. So then we look at some of the forces in the y direction. So you have normal force. We've got a y component of applied force that's going up, and then force of gravity that's going down. So gravity, the force of gravity is equal to the sum of normal force plus applied force in the y direction. So correct answer is B. Okay. You're pulling up. The normal force doesn't have to support as much as the load because your applied force is taking some of that. You okay with that? Okay. Last question. Last question.
Which one has more friction?
Which has less friction?
Oh, less friction. Oh.
Have that obvious conversation in your own brain.
You want me to talk in my head?
Yeah, to yourself.
Voices?
Yeah. Have a conversation.
Hey. Just pushing on them.
Because
Because
you're
ground.
yeah,
It's just more.
And hopefully your conversation incorporates that.
yes. What? So the force in normal axis is more, which pushes downward. Say, bigger number compared to pulling, which is less.
I don't want to bring my
Normal Unless normal force pull it up and push it down.
I should, but
I think you
I have too much frustrations.
Devin, you're not very skippy.
I feel like the proper way is to stop.
Yeah, but you can push it down. So you go up there.
Okay, correct answer is A, pulling up. Okay, so mathematically, it's reducing the normal force as you pull up. Okay, conceptually, here's the idea. The reason why normal force causes greater friction is because you're shoving the molecules together more if the normal force is greater, causing more things to break, versus if you're pulling up, you're reducing that interaction between the molecules of the ground and the sled. Does that make sense? That's why cleats are best. Yep. Good with that? Okay, so you have a lab quiz tomorrow over the 2 online labs.